Audio?
Okay.
Okay, it's not going to show. Do I need to start this video?
Yes. Laboda. I mean, my father-in-law was from
What happened?
Poland, but really in Spanish.
Why didn't you come in?
And it's funny because
Why
my
isn't
father-in-law
it?
spoke fluent Spanish, but.
Yeah, why is this?
No, it's fine.
So why isn't it?
No, my father-in-law was in Santo Domingo.
I don't see anything coming up.
Can will not be used.
No. Well, they were Uzbekistan, and then they were my father-in-law was in Siberia, and then he lived in Paris, and then he went to Santo Domingo, and then they lived in the Bronx. You know, that's what happened.
Okay.
Because they had
Okay.
ladies lingerie stores
I don't
in the
know what
Bronx
happened.
and then in downtown LA. And
I don't know.
well,
Might not
he
be
lives
able to
in
be
Santo
used.
Domingo.
Is it
and that's
recording?
what he did. They
No.
don't live in
So
Curacao.
how do we get
I
back?
don't think. I never heard that.
No, I don't want to.
Well, you can be sure I'm going to be asking Michael and Rosie about that tonight.
Is he home?
I never heard that part of the story. Right. No, my father-in-law.
Is it
spoke
recording?
Yeah.
It is
7
recording.
languages fluently.
Thank you.
And then lots of
Enjoy,
others.
Okay.
He was
Thank
really.
you.
Let's begin. Okay, Chayei Sara. What? Yes, Shachiar. Well, we started 2 weeks ago. It's been a long time ago. It's been a long time. Okay. Page 106 in the Chumashim. Chayei Sara. So the first aliyah. That's what we do then this year. Vayu Chayei Sara. Let's just read so we know what we're going to be studying, okay? Vayu Chayei Sara me'ashana v'esum shana v'sheva shanim shnei Chayei Sara. Sarah's lifetime was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, the years of Sarah's life. Vatama Sara b'Kiryas Arba hi Chevron. She dies in Kiryas Arba, which is Chevron be'eretz Canaan. Vayova Avram lispod l'Sara v'liv kota. Avram came. He's obviously not in the same city. He's coming from somewhere, and he comes to eulogize and to cry. Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meto. And Avram rose from the presence of his dead. So he gets up from the coffin. And he turns to the people, B'nai Ches. They're the ones who live in Hebron at this time. He makes this famous declaration. I am a ger, I'm a stranger, and at the same time, I am a toshav, I am a citizen among you. I'm asking you, right? He's saying, please allow me to buy this kever, buy this piece of land, so I can bury my dead before me. And B'nai Chet responds. What do they say? Shma'enu Adoni. Please listen, our master. You're a dignified, important prince. Choose whichever you wish and bury your dead. Choose the best land from our land. He say, we will not withhold from you any place from burying your dead. Pasuk Zayin 7. And Avram rose up and he bowed to them. Obviously, part of the protocol of the time. He bows to the members of the children of B'nai Chet. Now he responds. Remember, he asked them, I want to buy. They say, hey, please. You don't have to buy. We want to give you. You're a very important dignitary. You're a prince. So now he responds. He bows and he says, he knows who owns the land. This is an Ephron Hachiti. He says, he spoke to them saying, if it is truly your will to bury my dead before me, then do me a favor. Listen, intercede on my behalf and tell Ephron, I want to meet with him. Okay, so he goes on. Okay, you got it. So he says to him, V'yita pasuk test. V'yiten li et marat hamachpelah asher lo asher b'ksei sadeh b'chesav malei li b'tochchem lachuzat kaver. let him grant me. He's telling them, please notify, be my representatives to him. Let him know what I'm going to come and speak to him about. I'm going to ask him to let me buy Marat HaMachpelah. That is what he's saying, okay, to them. And we're now told that Ephron was sitting in the midst of Bnei Chet. So now he's holding court. Everybody's listening in on this conversation between Abraham and Ephron. And this is what he has to say. Lo Adoni, shma'eni hasaden asati lach v'amara shebo l'chon esatia l'nei b'nei amin esatia lach kvar et meitecha. No, my Lord, heed me. I have given you the field. Ephron's being very gracious. I'm going to give you the field. I'm not interested in your money. As for the cave that is in it, I have given it to you. In the view of the children of my people, have I given it to you? Bury your dead. Being very gracious. You can have everything you need. It's going to be your cemetery. That's what he says. And again, he bows. Quite evidently, this is all protocol. And now he says in Pasuk so Avram bowed, Pasuk 12, right, Jude base. So Avram bowed down before the members of the council. Then 13, he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the members of the council. Everybody's listening in on this conversation. There's nothing secret. So what does he say? Rather, if you would heed me, I give the price of the field, accept it for me, that I may bury my dead here. I'm going to pay full price. That's what he says. Again, this negotiation goes on. Now Ephron's turn. Pasuk Tesla, Adoni, Shme'eni, Eretz Haba Me'od Shekel Kesef V'nivna Chamahi, Nes Me'schok for you're insisting. So okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to charge. I'm going to charge 400 silver coins, shekels, in negotiable currency. As Rashi is going to explain, right? As everybody remembers, this is the best coins. This is beyond anybody. He's going to pay the best, right? You can negotiate this coins. You don't have to go to a foreign exchange bank. This is accepted by everybody. That's what he's going to pay. Okay. And he says, Ephron finally gives. Ephron knows in the back of his mind. He knows that Avram wants to pay. Oh, you want to pay? 400. Right? What is it between 400? He doesn't negotiate the price down. Notice, you want 400? You're getting 400. I'm going to give it to you. And that's what he does. The Torah goes and tells us it is the best currency. No question about it. Avram takes out the best. The Yochim stay up front. Pasuk Yudayin, right? And Ephron's field, which was in the Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field and the cave within it, and all the trees in the field within all its surrounding boundaries was confirmed. They were sold, right? He buys it all. As Avram's purchase is done, no secrets here. Everybody's watching. Everybody heard. Everybody's watching. The negotiation is all done in front of everybody among who came at the gate of the city. Gate of the city is always meaning the most public place. It's the court of law. It's the city hall. Everybody is paying attention. Everybody's watching. Fine. Let's look at this. And afterwards, Avram buries Sara, his wife, in the cave in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Pasuk Chav, Vayakom hasadev ha'amara shebo la'Avram la'chuzak kavar me'es b'nei ches, and thus the field with its cave was confirmed as Avram's as an estate for a burial site from the children of Chet. I went a little beyond Sheni because it's all one story. The next, there are only two stories in all of Chayei Sara. The first story is the purchase of Marat HaMachpelah and burial of Sara. The second story is finding Rivka as the wife for Yitzchak. Okay, we're going to study this first story, the story of the burial of Sara. Introduction. The Rav makes an observation that is crucial in understanding this entire aliyah, this entire story of finding Marat HaMachpelah. He notes, How long does Avraham live after Sarah passes away? Another 38 years. We know basically nothing of those 38 years. The only two things that we know after Sarah dies is this first story that he purchased Marata Machpelah for her and buries her there. And number two, he arranges with Eliezer to find Rivka as Yitzchak's wife. But that story is more to introduce who Rivka is to the biblical story and to us than anything to do with Avraham. He lives 38 years post his wife's death. And we know zilch. And Rav Soloveitchik says it's not by accident. The covenantal community, in the words of the Rav, B'nai Yisrael, in simple English, right? B'nai Yisrael needs a woman and a man at its head. Our patriarchs had matriarchs with them. They weren't single men. There were a couple, and they worked together. As soon as one part is no longer there, the other part cannot function. Avram and Sarah are glued together at the hip, physically and literally. And as soon as Sarah dies, what happens to Avram? Avram becomes, if you will, a non-entity in Jewish history. He is an entity in Jewish history when his partner, Sarah, is alive. It's fascinating. I don't know if you paid attention, but a few weeks ago, Rabbi Moshe David Tendler passed away, the Rosh Yeshiva in YU, the son-in-law of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, very famous personality on his own right. I just read this morning a beautiful, beautiful hesped that his granddaughter wrote about him. And I think it was published in Mishpacha magazine. I believe so. It's gorgeous. And he said she passed away, the Rebbitzin passed away, I think 14 years ago. And he was nothing afterwards. You know, I mean, he still was the Rosh Yeshiva, but he
Some
felt.
people would take,
Right. No,
would be kind of upset with this, you know.
Well, I'm sorry.
I mean, some people would take that.
But it's what's true is true. What's true is true. And she writes that. Anyhow, and the Rav is pointing out that you have to know this as part of this story as well. Now the Rav reads this story of purchasing Marata Machpelah for Sarah's burial, not as a historic perspective and not pasuk by pasuk, we know that, but rather how does the Rav view this as a story that's crucial to the future of Klal Yisrael.
You know, it's interesting. Did the Rev write this while his wife was alive or after she died?
I have no idea. I don't know. I have no idea. He was devastated.
Right. So that'd be
Right.
interesting.
Right,
when he
100%.
wrote.
100%. The Rav reflected himself in many of the biblical figures, in particular Avraham. There's a magnificent article in the latest volume of Chakira, where the author, she teaches at Turo in New York, the author notes that when it comes to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sara, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, in the Rav's interpretation of Chumash, they become not typologies, in other words, they become individuals that you and I can relate to. They're not just, as her word is, typology. In other words, Adam and Chava are typologies. You can't relate to them as human beings. They're a theory. They're an idea. But Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sara, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah are human beings that the Rav views through the text as models for us to emulate. And their lives are living examples of life well spent, and we should follow literally in their footsteps. That's how the Rav views the figures, unlike Adam and Chava. But let's continue now, and let's see what we have. We have a lot to do, so let's see what we can learn, what the Rav notes. Again, remember, the Rav doesn't go pasuk by pasuk. That's not what we're interested in doing. It's a gestalt with commentary in the psukim as he builds this theory of what we can learn from it. So the opening pasuk, the Rav is bothered like every one of the Mefarshim. It says, Mea Shana, Esrim Shana, Sheva Shanim. Why the word Shana, Shana, Shana? He should have said 127. She lived 127 years, right? Rashi comments, everybody comments, and then they comment even on the repetition of Shnei Chayei Sara. These are the years of Sara. So the Rav notes this as well, and the Rav quotes Rashi, And Rashi quotes a medrash, one of the midrashim. There are many different midrashim. One medrash, if you remember, the Rashi says that 100, she was like 20 regarding sin. And at 20, she was as innocently beautiful. She didn't have to wear makeup, in other words. She was gorgeous. She was physically gorgeous, like at a 20, like a 7-year-old beauty, a real, honest beauty. That's what he says. The Rav says, what does that medrash mean? What is that telling us? This is, by the way, this opening sentence, the Rav notes, is the Torah's eulogy for Sara. What does it tell you about Sara? That she was 100 and she was 20 and she was 7. And the Rav notes brilliantly. He says, it tells us that throughout her life, she had not only adult features, but she had childish features. She never lost her innocence of her childhood when she was an adult. And when she was a child, she had an adult maturity. She fused both. She always was both. Most of us are not like that. Most of us lose our childhood when we grow older, right? Sara didn't lose her childhood, he says. The Torah is telling us she had, what is a child? The child's innocent, is excited, is when a child learns something. I watch my grandchildren. They're at that perfect age that they're fascinating. They're little kids and they get so excited about everything that's new to them. It just, you watch them sparkle with a new discovery. That, the Rav said, is what it means by Sara. She had that innocence. But then the Rav says, and I quote him, there are 3 mitzvot that play a central role in a religious life. 3 mitzvot that are crucial to the religious persona. 1 is called Talmud Torah. You got to learn Torah, right? 2 is tefillah, prayer. And 3 is emunah, faith. Talmud Torah requires you to be an adult. A child, because they don't have that maturity of years nor maturity of perspective, lack that ability to be wise and smart. What do we call a person who is well-versed? We call him an individual, a Talmud Chacham, we call him by the word zakein. He's the elder. And zakein means zeh shekana chachma. This Chazal, our sages say, a zakein, an elder, means a person who's gained wisdom. We know the expression. What wisdom? The school of hard knocks teaches us wisdom. Our children don't have it. Adults have it, right? Our little children don't have that chachma. Adults have that chachma. So Talmud Torah requires a maturity, requires adulthood. What about prayer? Prayer doesn't, the Rav notes, require adulthood. Just the opposite. Prayer, a child prays better than an adult quite often. A child has an innocence in his prayer. He turns to Hashem, he says, I want this toy. And he means it. You can grant it to me. Nobody else can give it. You listen in on sometimes their prayers, their tefillos. They're so honest. They're so innocent. Prayer requires an innocence of the child. What about emunah, faith? Faith also requires the childish innocence. A child has an emunah. Again, I refer to my grandchildren. I watch this fascinating. I see there's a sincere emunah, and we call it emunah pshuta, a simple, honest, sincere emunah. It's not a philosophical faith. It's a belief, a deep-seated belief. Rabbi Soloveitchik notes, these 3 things require a fusion of both the adult and the child. Sara had them. Sara, hold off. So we'll go only because of the time, and then I'll listen at the very end. Okay, hold on to your questions. Rav Soloveitchik noted, by the way, he felt that the Gadol Hador in his time, when he was living in America, was a person most probably that most of you haven't heard. Was very close to my wife's family because they were very close to the Rav, and they were very close to Rav Chaim Heller. Rav Chaim Heller is the person that Rav Soloveitchik felt was the Gadol Hador. When the Rav would fly in from Boston to New York to teach at YU Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, he would go on the west side of Manhattan and visit and learn Tuesday mornings with Rav Chaim Heller. They were very, 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 very close. and they both escaped from, the Rav left Europe in 1932 and came to America. Rav Chaim Heller was able to escape the Nazis and come to America, and he lived here and until he passed away, I think in the early 60s. And when he passed away, Rav Soloveitchik gave the eulogy, the hesped. And what did he call Chaim Heller? He said Chaim Heller, his example of Chaim Heller is he called him Hillel HaKatan. There is a biblical figure, there's a Talmudic figure called Hillel HaKatan. Hillel HaKatan wrote the 19th bracha of Shmona Esrei, the La Malshinim. The Talmud tells us in brachos, they had to choose one person to write this very difficult blessing, that changed Shmona Esrei to 19 blessings, from 18 to 19. And it was this difficult blessing called the La Malshinim, which was a prayer that those within the Jewish community, the enemies within our own ranks, would not hurt us, right? And they chose Hillel HaKatan. And the Rav analyzed, what does Katan mean? Katan, it can mean you're short in stature. Or no, that's not what it means, Hillel HaKatan. They were talking about his physical stature. Katan means he never lost his childish innocence. That's what he writes in the eulogy. It's beautiful. It's the same thing that the Torah is telling us, according to the Rav, about Sara. She never lost her childish innocence. She always had that desire to learn more, to conquer the world as children want to conquer it. And that is what the first pasuk in Chayei Sara is teaching us. It's giving us the Torah's eulogy for Sara. She fuses both adulthood and childhood together. It's interesting, by the way, what does the Gemara tells us that the Avram and Sara had coins minted for them. They were princes. On one side was the image, the Gemara says on one side was the image of an old couple. On the other side was an image of young children. Right? They were both. Their coin had both. They never lost either. They fused both. Okay, continue on. So then what does the Torah tell us in this story of Chayei Sara? So we got our eulogy. But then it tells us that she passes away in Kiryat Arba. He Chevron. Vayavo Avram lispo l'Sara v'liv kota. And Avram comes to eulogize and to cry. So of course, everybody asks the same question. He says, first of all, what's the first question that you have to ask is, why this? He could choose anywhere in Eretz Yisrael. Why does he choose Marat HaMachpelah? Why does he choose Kiryat Arba? What is so intriguing to him about this? So what are we told? We're told, again, Rashi quoting a Medrash, and Rav Soloveitchik quotes this. Rashi refers to Kiryat Arba as being the place where 4 couples are buried, will be buried. At that juncture, only one couple is buried there. Who's buried? Adam v'Chava. Adam v'Chava, Avram v'Sara, Rivka v'Yitzchak, and Yaakov and Leah. Rachel, of course, gets buried outside, right? But for him, you're standing there and you're choosing your place that is going to be the burial for the Avot and Imaot. Why do you choose the place where Adam and Chava are buried? Why is that so important to Avraham? Listen to the Rav's words. It teaches us that the Jew is part and parcel of the social fabric of the world. He and she, of course, I don't mean gender here. He says the universal problems faced by humanity are also faced by the Jew. Famine, disease, war, oppression, materialism, atheism, permissiveness, pollution of the environment. Does that sound very timely, right? All these are problems which history has imposed not only on the general community, but also on the covenantal community. The Jew, it has to resonate with us. We have no right to tell the rest of mankind that these problems are exclusively theirs. The Jew has to participate in running the world too. Realize what the Rav just said. The Rav is giving you his philosophy of life right here in this pasuk. He engages in the world around him and he encourages that engagement in the world around him. There's not the Goyish Welt, as we would say in Yiddish, right? The Goyish Welt, they'll deal with all of the non-Jewish problems. The Jew will only be here in the base medrash. Oh, no. The Jew has to be concerned about climate change. The Jew has to be concerned about pollution. The Jew has to be concerned about politics. Oh, yes. We have to be, and not only on our parochial level of worrying when the Jew has to fight anti-Semitism. That's not what the Rav wrote. Again, the universal problems by humanity are also faced by the Jew. I want to make a very important comment. The Rav was the only Rosh Yeshiva that talked like that. I never heard another Rosh Yeshiva talk like this. Yeah, his brother, Rav Aaron, did. I should take that back. His brother, Rav Aaron, did. The Rav believed this. He believed in the engagement with the world, and he encouraged that engagement with the world. It's very important to understand who Rav Soloveitchik is and what he's espousing here. And he's espousing through the text of the Torah a crucial lesson. Why is Avram interested in burying the Jew, his wife, and it becomes the authentic Jewish cemetery, by the way? In Eretz Yisrael, they might tell you where Rachel is buried. We're not for sure that Kever Rachel is Kever Rachel. There's only one cemetery in Eretz Yisrael from biblical time that we know is the real place, and that's Marat HaMachpelah, Ad Hayom Hazeh, to this very day. And why? So the Medrash was telling us he was interested in that spot because Adam and Chava are there. And the Rav says, crucial lesson. What's the lesson? We have no tension with the world when it comes to worldly concerns. We are part of humanity, and we must participate in that endeavor called protecting the world. We can't wipe our hands and say, "Oi, let the goyim deal with that. Oi, let the goyim." No. If we have talent, we have to share that talent. Okay, number 3. Let's go on. He said in this pasuk, that's the first part of the pasuk. What's the second part of the pasuk telling us? So we're told why we got a eulogy for Sara. We got an understanding of why Kiryat Arba, why Marat HaMachpelah is crucial for him, why he so wants that. And now at the very end of the pasuk, it's problematic. And the Rav scratches his head like every commentator does. Lispod l'sara v'lif kota, it's out of order. When you hear that your loved one passes away, what is your immediate reaction? To eulogize? Eulogy requires intellect. It requires a state of mind. When you hear that your loved one passes away, first of all, you're enveloped with darkness. It's like all the lights turn out. What do you do first? You cry. Then later, as you get ready for the funeral, you take pen and paper and you start writing your eulogy. Your eulogy has to be written with kaved rosh, with clarity of mind. That's not tears. Tears are in emotion. It should have been in the opposite order, right? And by the way, if you take a look at the text, and the Torah is written like this, in the Torah, if I pull out the scroll, and if the chaf, you say the leaf kota, is a small chaf, if that chaf is not small in a Sefer Torah, the Sefer Torah is possible. The chaf has to be the leaf kota. And he cried, what's the chaf? Okay, the Rav is not so concerned about the chaf, but the Rav is concerned about the order. And he says, it should have been, he cried, and then he eulogized. And the Rav says, don't get it wrong. Avraham was like every other human being. Avraham, when he lost Sara, he cried. There's no question about it. But what the Torah is telling you is he realized that his wife's death wasn't limited to his loss. He wasn't the only one that lost somebody. She was a universal persona. She had a universal persona. She was a personage that was so important that when she died, it wasn't just a human individual loss, it was an international loss. And that's why the order is out of whack. to tell you that he realized, yes, he cried. You can be guaranteed. As soon as they inform, remember, he's not there. He's not at her deathbed. By the way, you said somebody asked me, when does the Rav write this, right? The Rav's wife died of cancer. He was at her bedside all the time. He didn't leave her bedside. He was there in the hospital, and then when he brought her home, when she had a little remission, he was there. He took care of her. He stopped everything. And then he's in the hospital, and it comes that he's informed that he has to go see somebody to raise money. I don't know if it was for Yeshiva, for YU, or I think it was for Maimonides, for his day school in Boston. And a person, a very wealthy person, was ready to give a major gift. And they needed the Rav to get it. The Rav was the only one that was going to get the major gift. The Rebbitzin says to him, go, leave my bedside and get the money. Go for the fundraising. He said, I don't want to leave you. He had a sense that if he leaves, she will die. She says, you go. I'm commanding you to go. He leaves her bedside, and of course she dies. He, in his eulogy, says the pasuk from Yirmiyahu, as long as Yirmiyahu was in Yerushalayim, the Mikdash couldn't be destroyed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends Yirmiyahu out. Go, and what does he have to do? Remember? He has to buy a piece of land. Hashem sends him to buy a piece of land that will be our right to rebuild Eretz Yisrael. Our document, our estate, if you will, right? Our grant for the future of. So Yirmiyahu, the pasuk says, leaves Yerushalayim, and then he goes and purchases the land. He writes up the document, and then he turns around, and what does Yirmiyahu see? Yerushalayim and the Mikdash burning. Right? The famous artist, why am I blanking, in Amsterdam? Rembrandt, thank you, has a depiction, a magnificent depiction of Yirmiyahu turning around and outside of Yerushalayim and seeing Jerusalem burning. Magnificent. It's this pasuk, right? Rembrandt has that. So the Rav says that's what he's being told. He's being told, Lispod liv Sara v'liv kota. Don't understand this story as not just an individual tragedy, but a national, international tragedy. Okay? Now, the Rav notes grammatically, this very idea is being alluded to by the wording. It should have written lifkot aleha, which means to cry over her. He should have, that's what the Torah should have said. The lifkota, he says, is a transitive verb, which suggests that the subject and the object are one. What's the message? Abraham is, the Torah is telling you to teach us, Abraham and Sara were one and the same person. One and the same person, Abraham and Sara. The leaf kota, it was like part of him. Remember, as in my introduction, the next 38 years, we know basically nothing of what he does. When Sara dies, he dies with her. By the way, Rav Soloveitchik violated his family custom. His family custom was after the burial, you never go back to the cemetery. Briskers never went back. Soloveitchiks never went back to the cemetery. They believed you don't live in a cemetery. Rav Soloveitchik visited his wife's kever every Friday morning. Every Friday morning. They would drive him to the kever. He would come, he would spend time, and he'd leave. There's a very famous story that it was Chodesh Elul, it was before Rosh Hashanah, and people go to the cemeteries. So they went to the big Jewish cemetery where she's buried in Boston area, in the old Boston area, and a couple comes in to visit their parents, their grandparents, whatever it is. And the man is an Amaretz, and he doesn't know an Aleph from a base. And he sees the Rav, he doesn't know who the Rav is. So he goes over to him thinking he's a shamus. So he says to him, oh, you must be here in the cemetery because that's what they do. If you ever go to these old Jewish cemeteries, in Elul time, by Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur time, you'll find these old, I don't know if they still exist any longer. They might have, this tradition might be lost with the last of the survivors, if you will, with that generation. But you'd find these little old men in the cemeteries that time, and they would for the Amaratzim, they'd be able to say a Perek Tehillim, a Kalmale for you, because these people didn't know how to do it. So he turns over to the rabbi, and not knowing who he's saying, he says, "You're a rabbi?" Rabbi Soloveitchik says, "Yes." He says, "So you know Hebrew?" He says, "I know Hebrew." So he says, "Can you say a prayer for me?" He says, "Sure." So he takes Rav Soloveitchik as his Fisa Shamas from one grave to another grave to another grave, sitting in the second floor of the cemetery office. The director of the cemetery sees what's happening. And the Rav afterwards says, "Thank you, thank you." And he says, "Well, I want to give you something." He wants to give him money. Soloveitchik looks at him and says, "No, you're not to give me anything. I helped you. Thank you very much." He gets into the car and takes him. The gentleman director comes running down to this. This is a documented story. I'm not telling you above my sis. The director comes running down to this man and he says, "What did you just do?" He said, "Oh, there was a very nice little old rabbi." He says, "Do you know who that rabbi was?" He says, "No, but he was very kind. He said all the prayers for us. I wanted to give him. He wouldn't take anything. Such a nice rabbi." He says, "He is Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, the leading rabbi of this century. That's the greatest Talmudic scholar of this century. That's who you just had." He's like, anyhow, the man contacts the Rav. This goes back in a time when the amount of money that he gave was amazing. He contacted the Rav afterwards and he apologized. And he was a very wealthy man. Every year he would send the school $1,000, which in those days was serious money. It was like $25,000 every year in honor of Rav Soloveitchik sent to Maimonides because of that story. So, okay, let's continue on. Vayakam Avram mi'al pnei meso, pasuk gimel. And Avram gets up. What's the important word? What's the operative word here? Vayakam Avram. Remember, the Rav is reading this as lessons for us, not just lessons about Avram and Sarah's burial. Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meso. I ask you, what is the most important operative word? Vayakam. A person, when they lose a relative, what's your posture? We sit. We sit low. Today I took the Itzkeviches out of their Shiva this morning for Fanya, for Mrs. Itzkevich. What do you say at the end of the Shiva period? Kumu. All those that come to be Menachem after the last Nechama, you say Kumu. What does that mean? Rise. Continue. Carry on the legacy. We don't live in the cemetery. We don't live in death. We're a Toras Chaim. Vayakam. Kumu means, as the Rav says, by stating that Avram stood up, it indicates that Avram heroically ended his personal mourning. At that very moment, he transforms himself into a dignified prince and he begins negotiations. You can't do that while you're sitting Shiva. You're burdened with the loss. Vayakam, you regain your stature. Mourning is characterized, as he says, by the inability to stand erect. By standing erect, you've regained your dignity. Vayakam, he stands up. It's a lesson for all of us, right? He understood that he had to rise for the future of the covenantal community. He's not just doing it for himself, he's doing it for Knesset Yisrael. When we end the Shiva period, that's exactly what we tell the Yovel. Carry on the legacy. Don't live with death. Carry the legacy. Okay, the Ibn Ezra cryptically states, by the way, me'al pnei meso refers, the Ibn Ezra refers in the Rav Soloveitchik notes, it's me'al pnei meso, it says he got up from Sarah's body. What's the lesson? Avram realized she may very well physically be dead, but what is she not dead? She's not dead spiritually. She's not dead in her impact on generations to come. And we know that. Can you imagine? This is thousands of years ago and we're still talking about her. If you think about that, it's unbelievable. That is what Avram realized. And the Pasuk is telling us, according to the Ibn Ezra, me'al pnei meso, got up from her coffin. He realized physically she is no longer here. That is true. But her impact is still live and well and will continue for generations to generations. Now we continue on and we're going to see what he does in terms of the purchase of the Maras HaMachpelah. So what does he say? Very important in the next pasuk. Again, a lesson not just pertaining to the text in front of you vis-a-vis Avraham, but vis-a-vis us. What does Avraham say to the Bnei Ches? A contradictory word. A very famous, it becomes very famous expression. Ger v'toshav. He turns and he begins the negotiations. Ger, what's a ger? I'm a stranger. Toshav, what is it? I'm a citizen. Do you have a visa? Do you have a passport? What do you have? If you're a visa, you're a ger. If you're a passport, you're a toshav. Tell me, what do you have? You can't have both. I don't need a visa to come into the United States. I'm a toshav. When I go outside to any other country, I have to get a visa. What am I? What are you? You're a ger and a toshav. So Rav Soloveitchik says he was teaching us a lesson about Judaism vis-a-vis the world. Our interaction, remember, he did encourage engagement. We already saw that. That's why he wants Kiryat Arba, he wants Marat HaMachpelah. Now listen to the Rav's words. What is our position vis-a-vis modern civilization? That's what's being asked in these words. These words are giving us an insight into our position. With respect to science, to Western culture, to the countries in which we live, what is our position? The answer is enshrined in these two words. Certainly, I am a resident. I am one of you, he says. I engage in business as you do. I speak your language. I take full part in your social economic institutions. But don't make a mistake. At the same time, I am a stranger. And in some respects, I am a foreigner. I belong to a particular world, one that is completely foreign to you. It is a world in which I am at one with the Creator. It is a world populated by characters unknown. Excuse me for 2 seconds. Just turn on. Okay. It is a world populated by characters unknown to you, with a tradition that you do not understand, with spiritual values that seem impractical in your eyes. It is a world full of altars and sacrifices, a world of Torah, of loving kindness, of sanctity and purity. You live differently. You pray differently. Your conception of charity is different from ours. Your days of rest are different from ours, and so on. In these matters, I am a stranger in your world, and you are strangers in mine. Jewish burial, this is why he says, why does he say this too? Jewish burial is one of those areas that we are not alike. We do not bury with you. We bury by ourselves in our own cemeteries. What's the halacha when you create a new community? One of the first things that you do, the first thing that you do is you build a mikvah. The second thing you do before a shul is what? A beis hakfaros, a Jewish cemetery. A Jewish cemetery. That's why it's so important. You're not going to, in other words, what is he telling them? You're not going to understand me. Yes, I'm one of you, but I'm not one of you. I am schizophrenic in that sense. I'm a ger and I'm a toshav. I'm willing to be the toshav with you, engaging in the world around you, but I'm a ger. I have to bury my own dead in my burial space. Continue on. Pasuk Vav. What do they say to him? Nasi shema'enu not Adoni. Nasi Elokim ata b'tochenu. B'mivchar kivarenu kvar et meitecha. Choose the best. We're willing to give it to you. Avram was honestly respected. What are we being told? He was honestly respected as a great man, a great dignitary. The non-Jewish world knew exactly who he was. The Hittites deeply respected him. He's considered in their eyes a prince. But the Rav recounted the following story that he heard from the Rothschild family of Paris. And I heard it, by the way, this story I heard directly from Rav Soloveitchik when he taught us Chayei Sara on a Tuesday night at YU. I told you this in the opening shiur. The Rav used to give Chumash shiur. Everybody knows Rosh Yeshiva's Gemara shiur and Halacha shiur. The Rav gave very popular, hundreds of people would come, Chumash shiur. I was in his shiur and he announced, by the way, tonight I'm announcing I'm starting a Chumash shiur here at YU. Tuesday nights. Within hours, 500 people showed up within hours. He told it to us at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. By 7 or 8 o'clock, whenever the Rav walked into first hall, 5th floor, 501, they walked in, the place was packed. Everybody was running to get chairs to hear. And the first parsha that he taught, I'll never forget, was this parsha. And the Rav said the following story in that shiur. When French Premier Charles de Gaulle was informed that the Rothschild family was planning to transfer Edmund James D. de Rothschild's remains to Israel. You know where he's buried? In Zichron Yaakov. Beautiful cemetery. Zichron Yaakov, beautiful area, right? When de Gaulle was informed that they were taking the bones from Edmund D. Rothschild to be buried in Israel, he became indignant. He called in the Rothschild family and he lambasted them. And he said, now I realize the truth of what makes a good Frenchman. Until now, I was mistaken. Who's a good Frenchman, de Gaulle said to the Rothschild family. And the Rav said, I heard this from the Rothschild family themselves. This is a true story. De Gaulle screaming at the Rothschilds, I want to know who's a good Frenchman. I was mistaken. I thought a good Frenchman is one reared in France, educated in the French schools, whose native tongue is French, who's ready to take up arms to defend France. And then he says, and who's buried in French soil. Edmund D. Rothschild clearly wasn't a good Frenchman. No matter what you do, you can't win. And the Rav said, and Chayei Sara, he said, this is exactly what Avram was telling Bnei Ches. I'm not a good Frenchman. I need my own burial spot. The Jew has to be buried in the same place where the other Jews are buried, not in the same place where the non-Jews are buried. The same philosophy was expounded by Bnei Ches. They wanted, just like French, like de Gaulle, we're going to give you the best, right? But he said, no, I'm going to bury my dead elsewhere. Plus of test, moves on. So then he says, so Avram chooses. He says, I want Marata Machpelah, I want the field, I want it to the very edge of the field. Rav Soloveitchik says, and again, I heard this in the shiur, he says, we learn 2 halachot from this pasuk. Pasuk test, what do we learn? 2 halachot that pertain to this to the burial place of a Jewish cemetery. 1, it has to be a secluded burial place. It has to be secluded from everyone else. And he wants to pay it in full. He does not want it granted as a gift. The Jew must own his Beis HaKvaros. Why must he own his Beis HaKvaros? He's worried that if Ephron would grant it as a gift, Ephron would always have mental reservations regarding who really owned the land, and that would invalidate the ownership itself. Okay, continues on, right? So he gives it to him, Ephron, Yosef B'Soch B'nei Ches, Vayan Ephron, Achitias Ephron, all of this, fine. Then move on to Pasuk Yud Zayin. Vayokom stay Ephron asher b'machpelah asher lifnei Mamrei. Right? Asher lifnei hasadeh v'amara asher bo b'chol eitz asher b'sadeh asher b'chol gvulo saviv. And here, Pasuk 17, Ephron's field, which was Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field and the cave within it, all the trees in the field, within all of its surrounding boundaries, was confirmed. The Rav noted that the story of Maras HaMachpelah has taught us these lessons, again, these very important lessons, but then that we have to have it secluded and totally separate. But he also teaches us the following. Continuing to Pasuk Yotes. B'acharein kain kavar Avram es Sara ishto amarat sedei hamachpelah asher pnei mamrei hi Chevron beretz Mitzrayim. And Pasuk Yotes. And afterwards, Avram buried Sara, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, which is Chevron. The story teaches us the stringency of burying the Jew only in the Jewish cemetery. Right? If one is buried, this is another halacha that the pasuk is teaching us. If one is buried in a non-Jewish cemetery, what's the halacha? The community is required to do all in its power to reinter into a Jewish cemetery.
Why would a Jew be?
Family decides. And an interdenominational cemetery. There are these kinds of cemeteries, interdenominational cemetery. That you bury the Jew in an interdenominational cemetery, we are obligated to go and to reinter. Rabbi Soloveitchik would say, my grandfather was of the opinion that it was so important to do that he would say, if the only person available to do the reinterment is a Kohen, the Kohen violates his kahuna. Kohen is not allowed to come in touch with the dead. If it's only a Kohen, that's how important it is for the Jew to be buried in a Jewish cemetery.
What about Jews who converted? That probably was a problem. A Jew who converted.
Out of Judaism?
Out of Judaism.
He left Judaism. Yeah, sure.
So that was probably-
Well, also, then what did they do? They would bury, it matters where they get buried, but if you had the power to bury them in the Jewish cemetery, we would bury them at the edge, not in because they violated their commitment to the Jewish community. Finally, Pasuk Chof. And the field with its cave was confirmed as Avram as an estate for a burial site with the children of Bnei Ches. Why the repetition? Repetition here, right? That Avram bought. So the Rav suggested that the repetition of the story of Avram buying Maras HaMachpelah and burying her was to teach us that there are two types of real estate being transferred. There are two types of real estate transfers, real estate negotiations. One's called Sedeh Mikneh. What is that? It's property. One easily buys property. There's real estate. People do real estate deals every day of the. There are real estate deals happening as we sit here, right? Back and forth. That's one type of real estate. Today it's yours, tomorrow it's not. Exchange, flip, right? There's this flipping of real estate. That's all one. There's no connection with the land except that you financially own it. That's one type of. Then there's another type. It's called Sedeh Achuzah. What's Sedeh Achuzah? This is property that you're attached to emotionally. One inherits a Sedeh Achuzah. You never give it up. It's a Sedeh Achuzah. What happens in Marat HaMachpelah? Is it just a real estate negotiation, a Sedeh Mikneh, or is it a Sedeh Achuzah? It's a Sedeh Achuzah. The Marat HaMachpelah changed its identity. It went from a Sedeh Mikneh, a piece of real estate property, to what? A Sedeh Achuzah. And that's why the Torah repeats, and in particular at the very end. You want to know what this land is? Understand there was a transformation of this land. It went from a piece of real estate to Jewish inheritance. The Ramban adds that this event of Maras HaMachpelah is crucial because it demonstrates the divine fulfillment of the promise that Avraham was going to own Eretz Yisrael. With the purchase of Maras HaMachpelah, the beginning of our ownership of the entire Eretz Yisrael begins. Right? Interesting. 3 pieces of land are purchased in Tanakh. What are they? Marat HaMachpelah. Continue on. The Ir David, very good. The Mikdash, and what else? Shechem, where Yosef is buried. Which are the most fought over pieces of land in the world? Jerusalem, Hebron, Nablus. And we have the documentation that it is ours. I'll conclude by telling you an interesting story that happened not so long ago. It's not ancient history. It was when Chaim Herzog was the ambassador for Israel. Now his son is the president of the state of Israel. Remember, Chaim Herzog's father was the chief rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. And Chaim Herzog was representing the Jewish state in the United Nations. Remember when he was the ambassador? In Marat HaMachpelah, there was an uprising against the Jewish state by the Muslims. And at the time, there was a riot, and the Muslims pillaged the Beit. You've been to Marat HaMachpelah. They pillaged the Batei Knesset by Avram and Sara, what they call Avram and Sarah's kever, right? There's Batei Knesset with Aronot there, and you can daven, etc., etc. So they burned the Sidurim and the Sifrei Torah. It was a riot, a Muslim riot, and the state of Israel had to use its strong fist to quiet it down. People got hurt. I think some people died. Well, where did it go? This riot ended up in the United Nations Security Council. Oh, in the 70s. It's in the 70s, late 70s. And Chaim Herzog is representing us, and he's defending the state of Israel. And guess what he does? He opens up his remarks by Xeroxing, or whatever it was in the 70s, making copies of the psukim that you and I just learned. And he demonstrated Exhibit A. That's what he said to all of the members sitting there. He said, Exhibit A, this is from the Bible. May I remind you who purchased this piece of land? Not the Muslims. It was Abraham for the Jewish people. So we have a long relationship with it. What is it? It's a stei achuza, if you will, our words now, Rabbi Soloveitchik's words. It was the Torah repeats that story at the very end. It repeats the whole story to tell you a transformation occurred. The Ramban says this is an allusion to the fact that we are now becoming landowners. The land is, of course, Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so to wrap it all up, this first Aliyah teaches us, number one, a eulogy for Sara. Who was it? Number two, it teaches us her relationship with Avraham, Sara and Avraham's relationship, and what that means to us. It gave us some insights into our relationship with the non-Jewish world, right? And how it should be. It gave us insights into their magnificent relationship between the two of them. And it also gave us real insights into what is required for a Jewish cemetery. Use this as your first text when you want to know the halachot of what it's going to take to build a Jewish cemetery. And to this very day, what do we do in a Jewish cemetery? We fence it in. We fence it in. You put a border around a Jewish cemetery. Sometimes you have to buy a Jewish cemetery in small Jewish communities, so the government will only allow you certain areas where you can have cemeteries. So sometimes our neighbors can be non-Jewish cemeteries in the same area. But what will they do? They will fence it in with trees. They'll put around it to border it in, right? With literally a fence sometimes, but it always is demarcated. Where does this come from? Right here, that first Aliyah, what Avram did when he purchased Marat HaMachpelah. Yes, Khan.
I wanted to bring two things. First, is the way that it talks about Mamre.
Yes.
So maybe this is the conclusion of when the three Malachim came to tell about the three things that they had been assigned to do. To bless Abraham with a son, to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And here is when we were talking about Sara, that she was an adult and a child and everything was together, except I think in one place there, she lost it for a minute, if I may say so,
Right.
when she doubted that Sara, that she's going to have a child.
You mean she lost the emunah?
Yeah, this is I for a split second, because God is telling Abraham, why is she?
She's also human.
Okay.
Our avotim ma'ot are human. They're not Jesus figures,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're not divine figures. They're humans with their failings. And the Torah is very, Hirsch points this out quite often. In particular, the Torah is honest about when they make mistakes.
And one more thing I'd like to add, and maybe it is or not, this is how I look at it. When it says this spotted Sarah before crying,
V'liv kota. Right.
When it was the story with Ishmael and Yitzchak, God told him, listen to your wife.
Mishma b'kola. Shma b'kola.
And here when she is dead, there is no more a voice that you can hear.
Right.
And this is why.
So why would we leave lispod before the leaf kota?
Because I think that he was much more he was holding himself. He had to think about her life, but his sorrow and sadness continues for him forever, I
Right.
think, about Sara,
Right.
because he lost
Okay.
that, he lost that completely. And then there is another thing just now by the end when you brought up, I think this is the proof that Abraham gives when God told him, Lech Lecha, because Lech Lecha Ma'otecha Moledecha. So here it, to the land that I'll show you. So here he's telling me, this is our land, this is my land.
Right.
Even
Okay.
though I'm faithful, but
Yeah.
so I
Okay.
just-
Yes. The story of Keturah.
Yeah.
What do you know about her? We know nothing.
But we know that he was with her and had more children after.
What do you know about her?
I don't
What do you know about the children?
know
Zero.
their names.
The hole in the bagel.
No, but we know their names. Obviously.
No, I'm saying nothing.
No, my question is, this happened.
Post. Yeah, in those 38 years, nothing of importance.
But it was, it's a human story. It's important.
But what do you know about it? The Torah doesn't tell you anything except names. That's all. In other words, that's what the Rav's pointing out. Avram, when he did something of importance to you and me, that it's going to have an impact on our history, the Torah spends time telling you. The Akedah, the Torah tells time and time. Maras HaMachpelah. After she dies, yes, of course he lives another 38 years. Yes, he gets remarried. Yes, he has children. But that's all. Yeah, yes. It was blah. It was parva. It wasn't fleishiks. It wasn't milchiks. And Avram's life before that with Sara was real and impactful. And everything they did was a partnership. That's the point that the Rav is saying, that the Rav is saying. That you're right, 100%. Yeah, of course, he lives another 38 years. He doesn't vegetate. Yes, he's creative, but not in that same creativity.
Maybe
Yeah.
the
One second, yes.
No, I just wanted to say regarding this, we can, of course, we want to encourage, partnerships, relationships, they were
Yeah.
productive. But certainly, once you lose a spouse, life can go on and one can be productive,
100%.
So, I mean, whatever he did.
He had, but it's not
It
the-
wasn't as relevant, it wasn't.
What the Rav is pointing out, and it's important for us to understand this, that our leaders, our covenantal leaders, our patriarchs are a fusion of man and woman, and each is necessary. Each element is necessary. Yeah, it sounds, yeah, okay. No problem. Have a lovely day. A lovely day. My pleasure.
I think about Torah, could it be also interpreted